Hello, I'm Ben's AI Avatar, here to welcome you to another insightful episode of AI Insights, the Executive Brief. In this episode, Ben Bohman himself sits down with Jeffrey Wheatman, Senior Vice President of Cyber Risk Strategy at Black Kite and former Gartner analyst.
We are at war. We're losing. And in part, we are losing because we are a fractured defender against a somewhat unified attacker. The bad actors are talking to each other. They are sharing information. We, even at the same company, we see the CISO arguing with the risk people. We see companies in the same vertical who don't want to share stuff because they don't want to expose themselves to business risk.
Jeffrey shares his vast experience in cybersecurity and third-party risk management, giving us a deep dive into how organizations can navigate cybersecurity and its impact on business.
I think we need to stop looking at cybersecurity as a technology problem. It is a business problem, and we need to start treating it like a business problem.
From discussing the evolution of risk strategies to his journey from Gartner to Black Kite, this conversation covers critical insights into both cybersecurity and AI.
What are you doing better? What are you doing that your competitors can't do with AI? And if the vendor can't answer at least one of those questions, you may want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. There's still a ton of uncertainty. There are a lot of questions we need to ask that I don't think are being asked. We are still, as you said, I think we're still very early in the impact of AI.
Whether you're leading a tech team, managing business risk, or just curious about the future of cybersecurity, this episode is filled with actionable advice and thought-provoking ideas. Subscribe and join us for the full episode on YouTube at The Executive Brief. Thank you. Hello and welcome to AI Insights, the Executive Brief. Today, I'm sitting down with Jeffrey Wheatman, an SVP over at Black Kite and a former Gartner analyst. So Jeffrey, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, Benjamin, thanks for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to our adoring fans. So I am currently, actually just changed my title over at Black Kite. I am now Senior Vice President, Cyber Risk Strategist. Before that, I was Cyber Risk Evangelist, and people kept thinking I was in sales and marketing, and that's not my shtick. So we changed that. I'm part of the executive team over there, report directly to the CEO, and my job really is to talk about stuff. I'm the voice of the company in a lot of ways. A lot of stuff on social media. I have my own podcast, which we can talk about later, maybe. So I basically get to talk to people for a living, and it's a super, super fun job. And as you mentioned, before that, I spent 15 years as a research vice president over at Gartner, where I covered a variety of topics, primarily in the group that they called FMC, which stands for Fluffy Management Stuff. Okay. So a lot of board stuff, a lot of metrics, how do you build your team, where should the CISO report, communicating IT risk to non-IT stakeholders. And then one of the areas that I covered was third-party risk. And I am doing this a long time, and I see third-party risk management as probably the most challenging problem I think we've ever faced in cyber. And I have an opportunity to actually help people solve that problem. And then prior to Gartner, I built and ran a couple of small consulting practices in the Northeast. And then going back a long way, and I always like to mention it because people go, it's interesting to talk about. So I used to run security and network operations for Martha Stewart in New York, which was a super interesting place to work. And I actually met my wife there. So nice. if nothing else, it was a big win for me over there.
So you've got quite the background. Now I've got, so many questions I could start with, but I want to start with this, going from an analyst. So you didn't go just directly into being an analyst. You had, of course, like you said, with Martha Stewart, some of your other consulting jobs and things like that. And then you go into an analyst at Gartner, and then getting back out of being an analyst. How is that different? How is it comparable? How does it help? How does it hurt? Like, what's that like, going from an analyst to Gartner back into the business sector of actually being on the other end of the table?
Great question. It's been an evolution. As a Gartner analyst, your job is to talk. So, a typical analyst interaction would be a client saying, hey, how do I build a security program? And then I talk for 29 and a half minutes. So it was a big sort of change there. I do like a lot of panel stuff, a lot of moderation, and it was a challenge for me to move away from being the one who talks to being the one who facilitates.
Yeah.
But it's been a great opportunity. We just did a dinner in New York, and we had a moderator from a company we work with. And I said, so I always feel like I talk too much. He said, no, actually, it was perfect. You asked great questions. You jumped in, you waited. So I guess two and change years in, I finally have figured that out. Some of the other things I think that are interesting, and I loved working at Gartner. The company was great for me. It was a great growth experience. I do think, however, that a lot of the research they are doing is so far ahead of most people right now that it becomes almost impossible to practically use the advice. As an example, I was at RSA, and there was a guy there that did a presentation. It was a great presentation on risk appetite. Mm-hmm. I was doing that pitch 7 years ago to an audience of 40, 50 people because no one got it. And now this gentleman, he did a great job, and he had 700 people in the room, right? So I just think sometimes they're so far ahead, and that's a big chunk of the reason why I left to come to Black Kite, because I feel like I am closer to the problem, and I think I can actually help solve the problem rather than wax poetic and say, well, you should do this, and if it didn't work, well, you didn't do it the right way. So that's been interesting. And then the other piece is I have gotten the opportunity to be much more strategic in the way I think and the way I engage with my peers. Our COO, Chris Bush, who's a former CISO, said to me early on, he said, I love to watch you work. He said, because you sit there, you listen, you pull the pin on a hand grenade, you throw it into the middle of the room, and then you talk about what happens when the dust settles, right? So sometimes being able to shake things up and be disruptive. At Gartner, we were not always allowed to do that.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience, and I still have a lot of friends there. And in fact, I'm going to see a whole bunch of them at Black Hat, or by the time this goes up, I will have seen them at Black Hat because it'll be a little while down the road. But
right.
Yeah, I made a lot of friends there, and I learned a lot about how to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously from the analyst standpoint, it's interesting as you talk about like blowing things up, and there's such a tact to that, right? Because sometimes when you're having a conversation, it could be with the business or other people around technology. When there's no emotion, sometimes you're not really getting anywhere. You're not really getting the depth of how people really feel or how people really think. But if you create too much emotion, now you're also not getting to really the root problem of how people feel and how people think. So I think that is such a important tact to be able to evoke emotion, the right emotion, get people talking, get people out of their comfort of what they usually say. Also get people, when I say out of the comfort, comfortable to maybe say a controversial take, but know that they're not going to be judged, and it's an overall conversation. So I definitely respect that. Love that. Now, if you want to add something to that, that's fine. But also I want to know about Black Kite too, a little bit about them. But what's your thoughts on the emotion?
So I have two speeds. It's this or sleeping. Like I don't have like a low. So it's funny because people love to take me out to go to meet with clients because, as you may have picked up, I love what I do. I love this. Right? I have a life beyond my wildest dreams that was given to me by a career in cybersecurity. So I strongly believe you can't really overdo the emotion. I think if you're excited, the audience is excited. I always talk about, I'm actually creating a presentation on how to not bore your board. And the first thing I talk about is how you're going to hook them, right? How are you going to get them engaged so they lean forward and they recognize that it's worthwhile to have that conversation. I mean, you've been to conferences, I've been to conferences, and I've seen way more people who have great topics, great tech, and can't deliver it with anything that gets the audience engaged. So,
well, it's storytelling, right? I mean, I think the art of storytelling and technology is difficult. And then if you get someone who's too far into the engineering side of technology. And I'm not saying that they're not out there, because there are engineers who can talk and tell a story, but they just start talking about the technology. And in most cases, the technology is pretty boring. I mean, I guess it can be exciting, but the story around the technology, what it solves, what it does, and that's really what people, I think, are interested in, is like the business story around the technology and how does it fit into the business, right?
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. And I'm a big fan of storytelling, and I coach people on how to do it all the time. It's actually my favorite topic to talk about. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know how to do it. They don't think they can be good at it. And if anyone's interested, reach out to me. I'm happy to. I love coaching people in how to do that, because I think the words "once upon a time" are probably the most evocative and powerful words in the language, and I think you get people going, and it's way better than throwing a bunch of statistics.
For you, though. Sorry, I'm going to double, because if you're a sales engineer, especially a sales engineer, and you're listening to this, and you're wanting to know how to improve connecting to your client and connecting to the customer, and even connecting to your sales team around you as a sales engineer, talk to Jeffrey about storytelling. I mean, if that's something you help with, sales engineers, the good sales engineers can tell a story around not just what the technology does, but again, the business, the use case for it, and everything else with it. So I love that. Now I'm interested. Now I'm interested in, we'll get to Black Kite in a sec, but now you're the way you got into technology. For me, it's interesting because I never even owned a computer when I got my first technology job. I was working at Denny's. I read something about an MCSE, and I was like, oh, they're making a lot of money. So I went and enrolled in MCSE and ended up getting a job and just kind of working. And I was more hands-on, though, than technical learning. But were you first interested in cyber? Was it into technology, then into cybersecurity? Like, what's this evolution for you? Because you also have this great personality wrapped around it.
Yeah. So I was in retail. I was managing a hardware store in New York City, and I was miserable, and I was coming home every night and I was yelling at my girlfriend, and who actually eventually became my first wife. And I kind of did some self-reflection. I said, you know what? I hate working retail.
Yeah.
I just didn't like it. It wasn't fun. So I said, I've always been pretty good with computers. So I actually went and I put myself through Novell NetWare training. So you talk about MCSE. Yeah. Okay. So for those of you out there that are younger than we are, Novell invented corporate networking.
They were it.
So I went through that, and I've always said I've always had a knack for sort of being in the right place at the right time. And I figured out how to get a job when I didn't actually know how to do the job, and I would learn how to do the job before the people that hired me didn't know I knew how to do it when they hired me, right? Mm-hmm. So that's sort of been my whole career. So I was doing networking. I was doing a lot of Cisco stuff, a lot of Cabletron and Terasys, a lot of architecture, and I was working for a consulting company out of Westchester, New York, and there were very strong rumors that they were selling or divesting part of the business, so we were not picking up any new projects. So they stashed me at this office because they didn't want me to leave, but I had like 4 hours worth of work to do a week. So I stumbled across this website called 2600, which is an old hacker zine, and I found these papers on, well, it's pen testing, but nobody called it them back then, written by this woman, Carolyn Meinum, who went by the nom de guerre of the Happy Hacker. And I essentially taught myself how to pen test. And over a 3-month period of time, I went, this is way, way more fun than what I am doing now. And I basically said, you know what? I'm not even cyber, it was before cyber. I'm an information security person. And I basically just changed my career tracks and again, got lucky and was able to build together the energy and the emotion and the passion and overcome the fact, because to be fair, I was not a very good pen tester, but I was a great social engineer and I loved that part. But when it came to pen testing, there are a couple of people way better than me. And then, then I got into consulting and, I liked that sort of piece, but I didn't really like the project element of it. And then, Gartner was sort of just the perfect opportunity because I get to think and talk for a living. And I learned so much about how to build stories and how to sort of engage. And, I could sit down at a table with a CEO and an engineer and actually get them talking the same talk and having the same conversation.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my my story.
Yeah, that's an awesome journey. My first, it wasn't even an office. So when I got first hired, is just to help build some gateway computers, and they just stuck me. It was part-time, and they stuck me in the server room, right, temperature controlled. So I was basically wearing a coat all day while I was building the computers. They also gave me my first computer because I never owned a computer when I got my first job. Windows 95. It was like I think it was a 486 Windows 95 computer. And those were still, it was right as Novell was kind of exiting, stage right, and NT, Windows Nice Try, was coming in and all that. But it was an interesting time. And back when it really wasn't plug and play, it wasn't even plug and pray. You had IRQs, all that fun stuff that we used to have to deal with back in the day. But love some of those memories.
It's funny you mentioned your first computer. I was at a networking event in Fort Lauderdale a couple weeks ago, and when they did the go around, like, who are you? What do you do? What was your first computer? Yeah. And I think I was probably the second oldest person in the room. And my first computer was a TI-99 4A, right, from Texas Instruments, largely because the TRS-80s from Radio Shack were too expensive. And my parents were not, coming up with the $3,000. I think that's what they were at the time. Sure. So I got this huge, big, giant box and used the big, giant floppies. I learned how to program BASIC and quickly learned that was not I didn't enjoy that part of it. But I've been in love with technology since, anything I can get my hands on, I'll play with.
I've always been tinkering and interested in it. Okay. So Black Kite, what's your main problem you guys are solving for? Or maybe not problem, but what is the main thing you guys are assisting in?
Yeah, so we work in the third-party cyber risk management space. So we have identified that there is a gap and a need for organizations to understand the cybersecurity posture of their partners, their critical partners, both digital, physical, supply chain, whether it's vendors, whether it's people coming in and taking out your garbage. And for many, many years, the only option was you would send out a questionnaire and somebody would fill the questionnaire out, and maybe it was accurate and maybe it was truthful and maybe it wasn't. Right. And you would do that every 3 years, and one of your major partners would get hit with ransomware or be hacked, and you'd be dead in the water, right? Mm. So we, over the last 6 years or so, have identified some mechanisms for sort of taking the view of the hacker, taking the view of the outside in approach and seeing kind of what the hackers do. And with all of that information, we have like 2,000 different data sources, and we're one of Google's largest data lakes. One of our sales leads actually calls it a data ocean because he's got to be that guy. And we're able to sort of establish perspective on the outside in. We can also ingest and parse out text-based documents, so questionnaires, SOC 2s, policies, and we can benchmark against out of the box like 16 different frameworks, and you can create your own custom framework. You want this control from here, this control from there. And then we bring all of that together, and we've actually implemented a cyber risk quantification mechanism for third-party risk using OpenFair, which is an open methodology. So now what we can do is we can help our third-party risk leaders and our CISOs say, we have 500 partners, 300 of them are a C rating, but, oh, wait a minute, these 4 over here, if they got hit with ransomware, we would take a $7 million impact. So let's sort of look at that, right? And then over the last couple of years, we've started to add a lot around risk intelligence. So because we have all this data, we can tell you generally within 24 hours of a 0-day being released, who in your ecosystem you might want to reach out to, right? And then, nothing is 100% accurate. But if we can go from 1,000 partners to, hey, these 50 look like they're running Log4j or Snowflake or whatever, and then the CISO can go out and sort of address that. And we have them for geopolitical. When Russia went into the Ukraine, we had customers saying, hey, we don't know if we have any partners there. And then just recently, we deployed a new mechanism where we're pulling in data from traditional supply chain as well as digital. And we can help people understand not just third party, but fourth and fifth and nth party. And there's a lot of regulatory oversight. So DORA, if anyone is in financial services and does business in the EU, DORA is going to hit next year, and it's an operational risk management framework. And one of the elements in there is vendor risk management. We've seen a lot more discussion around vendor risk from the US federal government, from NIST, from ISO. So it's really been doing this a long time. And I think this might be the hardest problem we've ever had to solve. And we bring intelligence to the decision making so that all of our customers can say, we knew about that risk, we accepted it, or we didn't, and here's what we're doing to treat it. And then one final thing, and our whole platform is all based on open standards. So there's none of this, well, we got two thumbs and Black Kite says so. It's we have the data, we can show you why the data maps to this particular cybersecurity posture or focus tag or supply chain connection, rather than having to throw it over the fence, which is what some of our competitors do, unfortunately, which is, hey, you stink at cyber. Ooh, you're right, we do. Well, how do we fix that? Well, we'll be happy to tell you, but you got to write us a check. And we don't play that. Yeah. We want to be good netizens, and we want to make everyone safer. And that's sort of our business model.
Interesting. So one of the things that I find almost humorous in cybersecurity is like when a cyber attack happens, especially at major scale, every cyber company is basically an armchair quarterback, right? Sitting back saying, if you only had our vendor, if you only had our stuff, you wouldn't have got hacked, right? Like, and maybe there's some truth to that, but I want to now, as I say, I kind of laugh at it. Now I want to armchair quarterback the recent event with CrowdStrike. What are your insights into that event from a risk management standpoint? Could that have been avoided, or is that just better testing procedures that let them down at the end? And maybe you have even more insight beyond that.
So I think at this point now, it is unfair to really sort of lay the specific blame at CrowdStrike. Clearly, their process broke down, and it was a huge issue. And, because of what they do and where they sit, it had this cascading impact. But I think that what we have seen, this is really what I view as a black swan event, right? Mm-hmm. Paradigm shifting, because I think this is going to be a watershed moment for resilience, which is good because we talk a lot about that. And I don't think a lot of organizations know what it means. You couldn't have predicted this specific thing. Could have predicted that something like this would happen.
Sure.
And now that it's happened, you look back and go, how did we not know this was a thing, right? The reality is, other than CrowdStrike doing a better job, there was little to nothing that any organization could have done to prevent this, right? Yep. Yes, you could stage your updates, you could test them, but most companies, most organizations do not have the resources to be able to do that. Right. And because companies like CrowdStrike, right, it's not just them, SentinelOne and a couple of other companies play in that MDR space, they have to be really fast because they're working off information they're pulling from the dark web and from, all the bad guys. If they wait too long, the bad guys are in through a 0 day. And because most companies don't have the capability really to do the testing, in my opinion, I think the exposure is greater to not deploy these things right away than it is to actually worry about something like this happening again. Because I would bet my bottom dollar, my kidney, half a liver, whatever, that CrowdStrike in particular will never, ever make this particular mistake again. Right? Yeah. But I think the key thing is to understand where your exposure is. We had a dinner in New York with a bunch of CISOs and risk people, and I asked a question. I said, would it be useful to add to your questionnaires, do you do MDR? Yes, we do. what product do you use?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then collect that. And then you could parse through that and say, oh, 90% of our partners use this vendor. Can you do anything about it? Probably not, but at least it's helpful to know.
Yep.
And I think that to me was the biggest thing is I don't think anyone realized how dependent they were upon this one particular company. And let me tell you, there are a lot of companies out there that sit really low in the stack that are plugging into Ring 0 that have direct kernel access. And if they had a problem, they would crash machines just like this one did.
Sure.
So I think a lot of it is about awareness and hopefully we're gonna see a shift around resilience, right? And resilience to me is what is our ability to keep the business up and running if something really bad happens, right?
Yep.
Whether it's a data center falling in a hole, whether it's 90% of our partners all of a sudden not being able to give us what we pay them for. I am hoping that we don't get an excessive amount of finger pointing. I think all companies have the potential to do this. And let's face it, I don't know CrowdStrike super well, but from what I understand, they are frequently rolling out multiple of these updates a day as they discover new stuff. They've been around a long time. Apparently, they're very good at what they do. And this is the first time we've had this problem, right?
Yep.
And that's not letting them off the hook.
Right.
But the other thing too that I just want to point, and I think you're spot on. I saw so many LinkedIn posts and I got so many emails, and a lot of my CISO friends got them too. Hey, sorry you're dead in the water, but if you used our product, this wouldn't have happened. And I think that is terrible.
Yep. Yes.
We had some data that we could provide around CrowdStrike in our ecosystem sort of discovery. And we just reached out to all our customers and said, here, this may help you, right? And it was definitely not complete picture, but we had customers reaching out and going, hey, thank you. Like that helped us kind of focus. And I just think people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. And I also, I'm a big believer in the need for collaboration. We are at war. We're losing. And in part, we are losing because we are a fractured defender against a somewhat unified attack,
Sure.
right?
Open
The
source
bad actors are talking to each other. They are sharing information. We, even at the same company, we see the CISO arguing with the risk people. We see the CISO arguing with the CIO. We see companies in the same vertical who don't want to share stuff because they don't want to expose themselves to business risk. We see people in different verticals who are not sharing information. And then I think the vendors need to do a better job collaborating as well. And we have made some overtures to some of our competitors, like, why don't we start to think about how we can take a standard approach? And people aren't interested. They want to fight over every nickel. And that's the reason why we built our platform on open standards, because that way people can figure this stuff out for themselves and they can validate. So, it's, we had a very spirited conversation at dinner the other day. But I think it's, hopefully it'll be a watershed moment, as I said, because stuff like this could happen again.
Absolutely. And if you're a salesperson listening to this call or to our conversation here, don't exactly what you're saying. If you know a company who just hit the news because they got hacked or they're down, I can guarantee the CTO, CIO, director, IT team is probably having one of the worst days or weeks of their lives. And the last thing they want is a solicitation of a service. Now, especially something that could have prevented what happened. Now, if it's a service to maybe it's recovery or maybe it's ransomware recovery or something like that can help solve a problem, that might be a little better received. But yeah, I agree. Don't suddenly jump on every single thing and then send it. It's almost like kicking someone while they're down. Like, yeah, I know. Like maybe
it is exactly that.
Yeah,
Not almost. Yeah. And there's been a lot of discussion about companies that took that approach. If I were CISO, I would never talk to those people again.
Never.
Right?
Yeah. You've just burned your bridge. Yeah, you've just burned your bridge. Now, so now I want to jump a little bit into AI conversation. I want to talk more around cyber risk and how, the good, the bad, and ugly of AI right now, and cyber risk and in management with that. But I also want to bring up an interesting point about resiliency. And I was thinking about this with AI. As companies, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But as companies start integrating AI, maybe completely into the business, and as AI starts maybe even running the business eventually, I know we're a bit out from that happening, but I think AI is going to run a prominent part in running businesses holistically. There needs to be some thought around resiliency with AI, and what's going to happen if AI has that watershed moment we just talked about and suddenly goes off the hinges. Can you still run your business? And so there does need to be some talk about resiliency, I believe, around AI. I know we're really future talking about that, but it's still, I think, it's something that should be addressed. But now overall thoughts again, good, bad, ugly, AI, cyber risk, what you're seeing, where does it play into it's going to help? Where is it? Oh, this is a concern. I think that's a fair question, but yeah, go ahead.
First thing, AI is not new. AI has been around since the 1950s. And if you really push a little bit, Charles Babbage, who created the concept around the first computer, which he called the difference engine, and Ada Lovelace, they were setting the table for these things well over 100 years ago. So that's important. A lot of people have now become aware of it, largely because of ChatGPT and all the Gen AI. But businesses have been using AI to make decisions for a long time. From a cybersecurity perspective, there are three perspectives I think we need to look at. The first one is our business is using AI, whether they know it or not, and whether they tell us or not, right? Mm-hmm. Companies are putting AI decision channels, decision frameworks based on AI and ML and neural nets and all these things. The bad actors, they're using AI. They have access to all the tools that we do as defenders. They have no ethics or morals. They have access to tools we don't have. And then we as defenders are inundated with vendors who say AI, AI, AI. Yep. And so I'm actually now stealing from a former colleague of mine named Mark Horvath. But Mark wrote a piece of research 6-7 years ago, basically saying when a vendor says they use AI, ask them these three questions. What are you doing that you couldn't do before? What are you doing better? And what are you doing that your competitors can't do with AI? And if the vendor can't answer at least one of those questions, you may want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. I was at a CISO retreat last week in Atlanta, and the topic was AI and cybersecurity, and they had 4 different sessions. So one was the board perspective, one was the CEO perspective, one was the CISO perspective, and one was metrics and reporting and performance management. And what we took away was there's still a ton of uncertainty. There are a lot of questions we need to ask that I don't think are being asked. We are still, as you said, I think we're still very early in the impact of AI. I think there's a lack of explainability about how a lot of these things worked. We at Black Kite, we actually tried to create, we've called it a chat BKT, right? Chat Black Kite Technologies, to scrape our data. We put it up in a beta. 2 weeks, we were like, this is not what we want. We pulled it down, right? And I don't think enough companies do that. I think people put it up and they go, oh, we got to say we have AI. So I think that looking at those things, then I'll just share one last thing. I was on a panel at MIT Sloan School of Business in April. It was a CIO symposium. I was on a panel with a senior partner at McKinsey and the CIO from one of the big box retailers. And we were having a great conversation. And about halfway through, I kind of turned to the audience and I said, so let me ask you folks a question. How many of you have governance or policy around AI? And only about 10% of the hands went up. And I said, so we're going to tell you a bunch of good stuff and you're not going to really be able to do any of it until you have that. So I think we need to start having discussions with our non-IT brethren and sistren. We need to start bringing this stuff to the board. Hey, you've probably heard about this. Let's tell you what's real and what's not, what you should worry about and what you don't need to worry about, at least right now. And I think we also need to push our vendors, both on the business and on the security and the IT side. The new EU legislation around AI, I think, and I haven't read the whole thing, I've read pieces and I've heard very good things about it, but a lot of what's in there is you need to be able to explain how the decisions are being made. And I don't think in most cases we do that, right? Yeah. So AI made a decision, and we know there's a lot of biases in them. Like, I use Midjourney to create a lot of images. And when I'm creating an image for a group of people, I have to specify I want a diverse group of people. I want diverse race, I want diverse age, and I want diverse gender. Otherwise, I get a bunch of white guys.
Yep.
Every single time. So these are the kinds of things we need to start pushing. But I think we need to start having open conversations. We need to start sort of saying, yeah, this stuff is dangerous. Let's talk about does it fit within our risk appetite? Because, of course, we know the flip side is if all your competitors use AI and you don't, you're going to be viewed as, an old state organization, and that
right
doesn't work well either.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting the next, I think that even understates what's going to happen the next 3 years. But it kind of reminds me back when the cloud conversation came out. And I was an IT leader at that time, and the CEO, CFO, and everyone's coming to me saying, hey, what are we doing about the cloud? But they didn't even understand like what it meant to be on the cloud. And technically, all my servers were accessed. I had VPNs coming in, everything was accessed remotely. And technically I was hosting the cloud within my own environment in essence at that time. But it's almost the same thing now. I'm talking to CIOs, CTOs who are having board initiatives or boards coming down saying, hey, what is our AI initiative? And asking them what it is. They don't even know what that means. And then beyond that, they don't even have a budget for that initiative, which is funny as well. It's like, you're asking me for my initiative, but also if I were to come up with something, you also don't have budget given to me. And maybe that's their way of trying to find out like, hey, do we need to allocate budget or not? What are these initiatives? But it does have a little two things of the past this reminds me of. One is the cloud. The second thing that I feel like could, and I don't think it will be as dramatic because I think it's more sustainable, but the .com crash, the .bomb, like that during the early 2000s, there are so many repetitive AI companies out here that are doing basically the same thing. And I know that's in general in technology, but I don't think it's sustainable. And even when I was talking, Zyra, I was talking to her and she was talking about how there's like $135 billion invested into AI and something like only like 60 billion projected to spend in AI, right? So even the investment is far outpacing the spend, if those are the exact numbers. But is there anything else that this draws parallels to or comparisons to or thoughts on that?
I think the cloud is probably a good one. I think also outsourcing was another thing. I think blockchain, although interesting, blockchain sort of died. Like, we don't really hear a lot about people talking about that. But here's the thing I think that's very important. AI is not a market, right? AI is an element, a component, a feature, a function. And for the most part, people are not buying AI. What they're buying is a product that has implemented AI,
sure.
Right? Like we have an AI implementation for the document parsing thing I mentioned before. We don't really talk about it that way though, right? What we say is, look, we have a better way of doing this thing that you need to be able to do. And I think that's the other thing too, is when a board says we need to have an AI initiative, okay, so what do we mean by that?
Yeah.
Right. And I know those conversations are hard to have because nobody wants to push the board and ask them those questions, but they're reading the papers. They're seeing, all this stuff. They're seeing the buzz. They're seeing the discussions. And I think we need to figure out sort of what are our objectives and is AI part of that journey? And I think in a lot of cases it's going to be. Humans are inherently bad at pattern recognition. We miss them when they are there and we don't see them, and we see them when they don't exist. And I think AI does a great job of that. I think it does a great job of sort of getting rid of background noise. But to my mind, AI is a partnership between some kind of agent and the human that sits next to it. I don't think people are going to be put out of jobs by AI. I think it's going to change what people need to do. And I think we need to train people and we need to facilitate this. And, I think that's an opportunity for the government to come in and help and done some stuff. But
have to definitely be so. We'll see how the government ends up stepping in and setting policies and procedures and actually some governance around what happens with AI. Man, humanity, there's so much more I could talk to you about, but I feel like I can only take so much of your time. But what I do want to know, and I talked to you about the way I learn is like I learn by conversation. It's always happened by doing in conversation. I could read a book and read a manual and I will forget it the second I read it, right? But if I do it or have a conversation about it, that's why I love this platform here, and that's why I do what I do. I mean, aside from giving insights to everyone else, it's a great learning platform for myself because I get to hear people and experts like yourself speak. So very much appreciate it. But you also have a platform. It might not be for the same purpose as mine, but you have a podcast as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and like the idea behind it and what you talk about on your podcast.
Yeah, so I've kind of always wanted to do it. I love presenting. I have a lot of friends in the industry, and I think a lot of them are very interesting. And when my marketing team came to me about 15 months ago and said, hey, we're thinking about spinning up a podcast, I'm like, I'm in. So we talked a little bit about what we wanted to do, and I didn't want it to be sort of a straight up interview thing. Not that there's anything wrong. I think there are some great ones out there. So we came up with this concept. The podcast is called Risk and Reels. And we basically talk about movies for a couple of minutes. So I usually ask the guest a movie question. So I just had someone on who never would have guessed in a million years she's a huge horror movie fan. So we talked about horror movies. I spoke with one of my colleagues who was a CISO for a huge aerospace manufacturer, and now he's a virtual CISO. So I, like, what movie did you like that was a transition story? So we do that. And then, like you and I did, I don't script anything. I don't have a bunch of questions. I like to kind of take the conversation where it goes. I don't know if you are a Howard Stern fan or if anyone out there is, and people have bad stuff, good stuff to say about him. But what I will tell you about him is he can make anyone interesting. He finds the things, and that is what I have tried to do, is finding all of the interesting things that people have and that they know. And, it's definitely been fun, and I like to think I'm getting better as it, I mentioned when you asked me about the transition, I was definitely talking too much in the earlier ones, and now I'm kind of figuring it out. And I actually had a great conversation with my boss yesterday. He said, you do a great thing. He said, you, instead of throwing your opinion in there, which is what people do, you kind of ask people, let's pull on that. Let's kind of, the expression they use is, let me pull that thread a little bit. So I like that. And we talk about risk. We just did one around collaboration. We talk about third-party risk. Black Kite sponsors it. They pay for, all the tech, but it's not a Black Kite commercial. I don't do that. And most people don't talk about it at all, in fact.
Yeah. So, if it ends up being a product dump, right? Like I think people see through that. So having the purity and naturalness of what you say now still, of course.
I think those are okay as long as they're pitched that way.
Yeah. No, true.
Right?
Yeah. And there's an interest for it. Yeah. That sounds like a great platform. So with you, last thoughts, it can be cybersecurity, AI, current, whatever you want to talk about. Also, how do people get a hold of you? How do people get a hold of your company? How do people tune into your podcast and watch it?
Yep. So closing thoughts. I think we need to stop looking at cybersecurity as a technology problem. It is a business problem, and we need to start treating it like a business problem. There's a reason why CISOs are not always in those big, giant meetings. People still view it as a technology thing, and we need to start talking more about business. I always talk about business objectives. How does this impact your business? If this bad thing happened, what would happen? Or the flip side is, if we manage this risk, what good things can we do? We can onboard partners more quickly. We can get product out to market. So that's sort of my one little tidbit. As far as getting in contact with me, I am very visible on LinkedIn. I am the only Jeffrey Wheatman on LinkedIn as far as I know. You can also search for Jeffrey Wheatman at Black Kite, and our website is blackkite.com. But if you have any kind of a profile, I will take a connection from you. I'm not one of those people where I'm limiting that stuff. If all you got is a headshot and no background, I will probably not say yes. But anyone else, and I love to engage. I love to help people. As I always say, this career, this industry has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I love to give back. I think there's too much gatekeeping in what we do. And I think we need to give and we need to share. And that's one of the things I like about my guests. I bring people on who give of themselves and give their time. And, you mentioned taking time of mine. This is a pleasure for me. I love doing these kinds of things. I love, if I can help you grow your thing, great, right? Because I think that makes us all more visible and good. And yeah, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And, feel free to reach out questions if you have topics you'd love for me to talk about on LinkedIn, because it can be a little draining sometimes to come up with new things. But we have a podcast go up every Wednesday, and then I have this thing I do on Thursday called the Thursday Think, which is essentially me wandering around with my dogs at 7:00 in the morning, coming up with something to talk about. And I think some of them are hits and some of them not so much.
Love it. Jeffrey, seriously, your insights have just been amazing, and just so much knowledge. I mean, not just from the technical aspect of it, but also the EQ of what you do, right? The emotional intelligence of what you talk about is very much appreciated. And I mean, especially for me, I love that side of things. And again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you jumping on.
Oh, my pleasure, Benjamin. Thank you very much for having me.